Welcome to Conservation Unfiltered, a podcast all about the North American model of conservation and your chance to dive into conversations about trends, research, and outdoor activities. It's time to get wild with the 2021 Conservation Media Award-winning host, Jason Creighton.
Here's kind of an interesting little tidbit here. They take those clothes because they may find a tick on them. If they don't find it, they're probably going to be one there anyways. They put their clothes and they throw them in the dryer on high for about 15 minutes. Not the washer, the dryer first on high for about 15 minutes. That dry heat will kill the ticks. Then you can put them in the washer, because you want to keep those clothes separate, because if you know for sure you've been in tick habitat, you're going to have ticks on you. Throw everything in a dryer.
Welcome back to another episode of the Conservation Unfiltered podcast presented by Conserve the Wild. I'm your host, Jason Creighton, and this is episode number 151, Time to be Tick Aware. Today, I'm talking with a tick and Lyme disease prevention specialist by the name of Brian Anderson. Brian is known as the Tick Terminator, and he works as a consultant and conference speaker. He also helps outdoor workers and outdoor enthusiasts learn about ticks and disease prevention. During the conversation, Brian details the life cycle of ticks, habitat ticks prefer, and why ticks seem to be so prevalent now. He also details a few tick-borne diseases, how to prevent tick bites, and what to do if you find a tick on you. Stick around to the end, because Brian ends the episode with a self-written poem about ticks. Well, Brian, on the line today, we have Brian Anderson, the Tick Terminator, as you heard in the intro. Brian, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good. Even though it's winter, it's, tick season is right around the corner, so we got to be prepared.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is something I want to get into a little bit, but we'll save it. But I'm going to say real quick, as a side note to start off, it seems like it's always tick season these days, where it wasn't when I was growing up. But let's not jump ahead too far here. What are ticks? Like, we hear about ticks, people talk about ticks. It's more in the news. What are ticks? And what's the life cycle like for a tick? Is it days, weeks, months?
Cool.
Tell us what you know about, just tick biology.
Well, ticks, to a lot of people, ticks, they think they are insects, but technically they are in the arachnid family. So they're actually part of the spider family, because they do have 8 legs. So that is a misconception with a lot of people. And and to get right into the, we also call them, what do they call them? Little vectors, because they can give germs, to us as humans. And anyways, I think that's how you pronounce it. But they can transmit diseases to humans. Okay, I'm not a scholar, you know what I mean. I'm learned on my own. Anybody who spends hundreds of hours like I have and do this basically, full time, you tend to learn a lot, So I learn about things that nobody else really looks into until I start talking to them. They, oh, that's kind of fascinating, But,
yeah. So when it comes to ticks, like if you would Google tick, right, you're going to come up with pictures that are mostly going to be an adult tick. And when, like, if you go out into a field or into the woods and you get a tick on you that you see, right, easily, it's probably going to be an adult tick. But there are smaller ticks. There's different types of ticks. I mean,
yes.
Give us sort of the brief rundown of sort of ticks and their life cycle and all that kind of stuff.
There's approximately 800 different species of ticks in the world. All right. Now, yeah, there's a lot. Jeez. We don't have anywhere near that many here in the United States. We have, probably 20 or less or something like that. Okay. But as far as the life cycle then goes, it's kind of interesting. A female tick gives birth to approximately 1,000 to 5,000 eggs at a time in the middle of summer. Okay. She lays those eggs out when she probably drops off some animals, some deer or something like that, and she lays those ticks. And after a couple of weeks, they hatch out of that egg, and then like any newborn baby, they looking for something to eat. So now I live in the north, and so their first meal in my area is normally going to be a white-footed mouse, because mice are crawling around the ground. They're very close to them because obviously they are just a speck on the ground, as you can imagine. I mean, you can barely even see them. It looks like a period in a sentence kind of moving around as they're so tiny. So anyways, they hop on that mouse typically and start sucking the blood out of it. All right. In that process, the germs from the mouse that go into the tick is where they actually get their diseases. They're not born, they're basically born disease-free. So they get that disease from the host, which is typically the white-footed mouse. Okay. After a couple of days, they drop off of that mouse and they do whatever ticks do, which ain't a whole lot. You know, they just kind of sit back and bask in the. They just got off the full belly deli, you know, so they only eat one time a year. So that's their food for the year. So they just kind of veg out and kick back. And in the process, in our area, they start, molting into their next phase. In that first molting process, they grow 2 more legs. They're born with 6. They grow 2 more. So the next spring, when they come out underneath the leaf litter and the snow melt here another month or so, they're going to be 8-legged. Okay. And at that point, then they're going to be what they call as a nymph-sized tick. Now, a nymph-sized tick is the size of a poppy seed. Okay. So that poppy seed sized tick that you can barely even see, if it got some kind of tick-borne disease its first summer from the host of the white-footed mouse, it's going to have it for the rest of their life. And that poppy seed sized tick, if it bites you, is just as lethal as a full-grown adult. They don't have to be a full-grown adult to give you a problem. So that's why we'll talk about prevention later. It's so important, to prevent that from happening. Okay. But anyways, with a poppy seed sized tick. So that next summer they could get on us, they could get on some little animal, like a raccoon or maybe something a little bigger, rabbits, stuff like that. And whatever is near them when they happen to be there, So anyways, they feast for another couple days, then they kick back and do whatever ticks do again, which ain't a whole lot. And they molt into their next series that fall, that winter, come out the next spring, then as a full-grown adult. Okay, now they're the size that most of us can see. All right, and they will try to use us as a host, or bigger animal. A lot of times they will get on a deer, and it's usually the females that are gonna get on us. The males don't normally get much on humans. So anyways, the ticks will get on us possibly, or let's say they get on a deer that summer or spring or summer. They will feed on the deer, okay? And deer never get Lyme disease. So what happens is they end up staying on that deer because they know that their life is going to be shorter. So they stay on that deer after they feed. They just ride that deer pretty much through the rest of the winter. The next spring, then the male gets off and he dies. The female gets off. She gives birth anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 ticks. And I tell you, man, that's enough to kill anybody. And then, of course, she dies. So their life cycle is approximately 3 years. If they can feed once a year for those each years. Now you have 2 types of ticks. You have a hard body tick and a soft body tick. I'm giving you the explanation of a hard body tick, which is the most popular ticks in the United States, the most popular ones. And there's 3 of the most popular ones. You want me to get into that right now?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. What are some examples of a hard body tick? Like the ones you're saying the word popular. I don't know that they're popular. They're probably the most prevalent, right? The most prevalent.
Yeah. The most prevalent, the most irritating, the most nuisance. How's that? Okay.
Yeah.
And there are basically 3 of them. The top one is probably what they call is a black-legged tick, otherwise called the deer tick. That's the one responsible for Lyme disease. They get the most notoriety for that, in the tick world. And they are pretty prevalent in at least half of the United States, and the eastern half anyways. So you have the eastern black-legged tick, and then of course on the West Coast you have a western black-legged tick, and they can also give Lyme disease too. Now ticks are not just they're not just for one disease. They can have multiple diseases all at the same time. Not every tick does have some disease. So anyways, so that's the most popular one. The next one is probably an American dog tick, or we nickname it the wood tick. All right, very common. And the other one is called a Lone Star tick. It has a little white dot on the back of it. So those are probably the three most popular ticks in the United States.
So, I'm being from Pennsylvania, that
Oh my
black-legged
gosh.
tick, that, I mean, it's everywhere, right? Like, and Lyme disease, Pennsylvania is like one of the most prevalent rates of Lyme disease of
It
any of the
is.
states.
Absolutely.
It's a really bad issue here in this state. Growing up, I remember maybe 2 or 3 times like seeing a tick on me, as a 37-year-old growing up in the 90s, basically being outside a lot. I don't remember ticks, and now it seems like almost every time I go into the woods to hunt or do some habitat work, like I'm at least finding one tick on my pant leg or something, right? So
Yeah.
what is it that is what is the reason why they're so prevalent now compared to 20 years ago?
They are growing in population, they tell me, from what I read. They say I'm not a big global warming type of guy, but we'll call it climate change, okay? And what that does is sometimes our seasons are a little longer. Maybe we have a shorter winter sometime, or spring comes a little sooner. That gives them more time to look for their host for that year. Remember, if they only eat one time a year, so that allows them to live longer. Okay, and Pennsylvania is absolutely one of the worst states for ticks, and you were 100% right, because New England, which is right in that area, because I tell people New England is kind of like ground zero for the worst causes of ticks. Okay, New England made up of Massachusetts, north edge you got Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, then New York, Pennsylvania, and over to New Jersey and up to Connecticut, Rhode Island. Draw a big circle around there. You call that New England area. And actually, in the 70s is when this little town in Connecticut had a real problem with this strange arthritic condition found among some adolescent kids, and their mothers were just really adamant about, "Hey, man, help my babies! I mean, they're sick. What are we going to do for them?" And long story short, that was the beginning of naming it then too. So they figured, well, what are we going to name this strange disease? So they named it after the town of Lyme, Connecticut, hence the name Lyme disease. So it's been around for hundreds of years probably, but it has definitely increased and worsened in recent years. So yeah, you're right. I live in Michigan, upper Michigan, actually, in the Upper Peninsula, 100 miles north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And we're second worst in our area, where you've got Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, going on Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, draw a big circle around the upper Midwest. That's the worst. Now they go down the Eastern Shoreboard. I mean, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas. I'm going to Texas next week to speak at a safety conference down there for some linemen. And I speak all over the country, which I love doing, talking about ticks. But yeah, it's definitely an issue out there.
So, where do we find ticks? Like, I feel like all these areas that you're mentioning, there's probably a lot of quality tick habitat in those areas, but then also there's probably a large portion of the population that also spends a lot of time outdoors. Probably coincidentally as well, also a large white-tailed deer population, since they're sort of like a carrier of the ticks. What is the habitat like? What does a tick need in order to live?
A big thing a tick needs is they need moisture. Okay, you're never going to see them out in the middle of a parking lot, asphalt parking lot, because that'd be too hot for them. They're going to need to be around some sort of vegetation, and typically it's going to be like grass, a brush, definitely lower than your waist. Remember, they do not fly, they do not jump, they do not drop out of trees. Okay, they sit on a blade of grass typically, and they call it questing is the proper name for that. And they're basically opportunists. They're hitchhikers, and they don't even ask permission. All right, they just jump on the some kind of host that they've been trying to smell and sense and feel their presence as they come by, because they have very poor eyesight, almost nothing. But they can sense that, and they can sense us. They can sense our CO2 that we breathe out, and the same thing with animals. And they just latch on, and they start looking around that particular host once they get on it for some place to have a nice little meal for several days.
You saw me chuckle a little bit there. I
Yeah.
don't know if it came out audibly or not, but when you mentioned dropping out of trees, that's something that I've heard for years, that ticks will drop out of trees. Like they'll climb a tree and they will know that you're there and like drop down on top of you. You're saying they don't do that?
No, I've heard that many times too, and I have read I don't know how many times where they don't drop out of trees. But think about this: in order for them to get up that tree, up that branch, they're going to have to climb the tree, and that's a very rough terrain for them to climb up. The only way they may be up on that tree is if maybe they're on a possum, okay, and the possum hasn't eaten them yet. And they would happen to fall off incidentally while somebody happened to be there. But the likelihood of that happening is very unusual. I think sometimes people think they drop out of trees because they have them on their shoulder or their head. But guess what? Ticks usually start off and get on your shoes and your shins, below your knees first. And if you have one on your shoulder, that's because it crawled all the way up there from your knees and your shins and your ankles. So
yeah,
that's their thing. They're natural crawlers, and they always crawl upward.
So, all right. So tick habitat, you need a moist area. Like there needs to be moisture. You said vegetation, thick grass, so overgrown fields, brushy areas.
Right.
But yet we can still find them in our backyard, right? You can find them in a public park. That's not typically going to be tall grass. So how do they get to an area like that?
From an animal carrying them in there.
Okay.
Because they probably drop off an animal. Because think about, let's say that tick is the size of a nymph-sized tick. Okay, they're just a little baby, but they're still lethal. They're on their host for, let's say, they're 3 days. When their belly says, "Okay, I've had enough blood," they just drop off wherever, and that could be there. So that's how you could possibly get them there.
That makes a ton of sense. I have to ask, like, is there anything in the natural world that kills them other than like possums eating them or birds or something? Like, I've always heard that the reason, well, not always, but I've heard that, like you mentioned climate change. The reason why there's so many more ticks now is because that the temperature doesn't get low enough for long enough to freeze and kill them. Do low temperatures kill them? Does a certain amount of snow kill them? Like, what is it? Is there something that just naturally can kill them in an area, or?
Well, if you're talking about that, typically in the fall in northern states, okay, the ticks are going to go down under the leaf litter, okay, for their winter hibernation, for lack of better words. And then snow comes over. Snow is as we both know, is a wonderful insulator. It's incredible insulator, okay? So they can stay underneath that snow and that leaf litter for months, okay, because they already had their one meal for the year. And then it does happen on occasion, even in the wintertime, that, you're in Pennsylvania, I live in Upper Michigan here. We have snow on a regular basis, but every once in a while we get 40, 55 degrees on a thaw in January or February thaw for a couple of days. And ticks have been known to come out. They say, "Hey, man, it's springtime, baby. I'm going to come out and look for a host." So they come out, and sometimes they may get on dogs. Rarely do they get on people, but they could. After it cools down a little bit, they go down under the leaf litter again. In order to really freeze out a tick, you're battling nature here too, because see, God made ticks. I don't know why he's on the same level of mosquitoes. He didn't make any mistakes, but I hate to say close, but anyways, he gave them a special little enzyme that circulates through their body, almost acts as antifreeze to keep them from freezing to death in the wintertime. What would freeze them is if they were in, let's say, in a tundra type of area, because Alaska virtually has none of them, which is a nice place. And if they were in a tundra situation with like 30, 40 below for, let's say, a month and a half or 2 months, then that would kill them. Down here in, we'll call it the lower 48, we don't have that typically. I mean, we've had, yeah, definitely below zero, and I'm sure you've had 20 below on occasion too. And we've had that 20 and 30, whatever. But if they're under the leaf litter in that insulation, they're fine. Okay. So that does not kill them like we hope it would kill them. Their natural enemies are like spiders and praying mantis, different insects like that. You have the poultry family also. You have chickens and turkeys and guinea hens, possums and nematodes like little worms. The state of Maine did a study on turkeys several years ago, and they found that turkeys, when they go through the woods, they are just have a voracious appetite. I mean, they're like a vacuum cleaner with 2 legs. All right. And they're eating all the ants and the spiders and praying mantis that also feed on the ticks. So their story was saying that, hey, I think the turkeys are helping the tick population because they're eating so many of their natural enemies, so the ticks can thrive even more. Who would have thought that? I mean, my gosh, that makes sense?
Yeah, turkeys, it does. But that's not something I would have thought of. I would think, I've watched turkeys walk through the woods, and you're right. I mean, they're constantly pecking at the floor. They're at the ground. They're eating, whatever it is that they're eating. And I guess I would have assumed that if they came across a tick, that they would eat the tick.
They do, but then they eat all their natural enemies too. A lot of them. So the ticks have fewer enemies, so they're able to survive even more. That's the point. That was the point of this thing. So they say guinea hens are really good at eating ticks too. People have them around their houses. Let them free range in the yard, as long as a coyote or a wolf or something eat them.
Before we get into sort of like how to prevent them getting on us, and I guess this sort of leads into it. Like, what can we do to the landscape around us to basically give a less hospitable habitat for them, so that maybe there are less ticks that even have the opportunity to get on you? What could we do as far as like your backyard, or even in habitat management type stuff that would limit the amount of ticks on the landscape?
Keeping your grass, the shorter the better, is a good thing to do. Keeping leaf litter, from collecting. I mean, in a lot of different places, a cleaner wood pile, because those are areas where they can, kind of congregate in there. Some people have even gone so far as to put like a 3-foot wide barrier around their yard of like wood chips or gravel or something like that. It's hard for ticks to walk across that. Keeping wild animals out of your yard if possible, because they could, animals can walk in the yard and drop their ticks, that are feeding on them in the yard. Having a swing set, let's say, in a sunny spot of the yard, because that sun is less apt to have ticks around it, because they want more of a shade if at all possible. I'm not saying they're never in a sunny area. But does that make sense there? Some of those things?
Yeah. So like, you want to rake up your leaves. You want to when I'm thinking about habitat management, like one of the things that's becoming more and more popular is something to do, on a landscape to help wildlife, and really forest regeneration and things like that as well, is like fire, right? Prescribed fire. If I would burn that leaf litter, right, on a couple acres, like would I see a reduction in ticks? I mean, granted, there's still wild animals that are going to be going through there, but like, would fire kill the ticks, or is it so the fire itself would?
Yeah. Actually, I'm finishing up my book right now. Hopefully it'll be out in another couple months. And I was going to call it Ticks Suck, but two most important women in my life, namely my wife and my mom, didn't like the title, so I'm probably going to say something like it's a war, the war against ticks or something out there, But anyway, in that book, I'm talking about how to get rid of them, and I do talk about the burning, controlled burning, and but that has to be that really works. I mean, if you can burn it at in the springtime. Now I'm not saying to go out there and burn those. Oh, I heard from the Tick Terminator. I'm covering my tracks here, but that definitely have to be controlled. But yeah, fire will kill them. And yeah, that's a good thing you brought that up. Yeah.
Well, and then even like I'm thinking even a little more long term, like, okay, I burn an area, some deer come into that area, some ticks fall off. If there's no leaf litter for the ticks, would that and I guess less vegetation while it's still growing back, like that would make it harder for the tick to survive in that sort of shorter term. Like it's not just the burn itself. There's a little bit of extra time after that that would sort of help buffer the population coming back up.
It could, yeah, because they would
Okay.
have less vegetation to crawl up on. But yeah, the burn would have to be done probably every couple of years.
Mhm.
I would suggest at least that, but in the article there, it definitely is a good deterrent, but you can't burn the whole forest like that,
Right, right.
That's a
Absolutely.
problem.
Yeah, right. So,
Yeah, for
um, uh,
sure.
let's talk about what we need to do to keep ticks off of us. So, in your yard, you said, keep your grass short, rake up leaves, try to put, things like swing sets, stuff like that in sunny areas. But what, if I'm gonna go pheasant hunting, I am actively seeking out habitat that ticks want to live in, taller
For sure.
grasses, brush, oftentimes swampy, moist areas, because that's where the birds are. But that's
Yeah.
also where ticks are. So what kind of steps can I take to try to keep the ticks off of me?
Well, you're going to go in that tall grass, like you said. So, I mean, wearing, some people like to wear lighter colored clothes so they can see the ticks on them. But I like to, no matter what I'm wearing, when I'm in the woods, I use a product called permethrin. It's a very low impact, a scale. I mean, it's great. It is very safe, and I spray that on my clothes. All right, and what I do is I spray it on my clothes, either on the clothesline. It's best to do that outdoors. And the cool thing about permethrin is that I want to explain a little bit here the difference between permethrin and, let's say, DEET, which we're all familiar with. DEET comes in off and all kinds of different things have DEET. And DEET is a wonderful product created in 1945 for military. The way DEET works is the scent, the smell, the aroma that is what a little insect notices. Let's say you have DEET, on your face and neck and stuff like that, and hands. When a mosquito flies by your head and they sense that and they smell that DEET, it interrupts their antennas and says, "Hey, there's no blood there," so they fly off. So it tricks them. Okay, so that works by the scent, the smell, the aroma. The way permethrin works is totally different. It's called a contact repellent. What that means is insects don't notice until they come in contact with it. All right. I've watched ticks crawl up me and then they fall off because every step they take drives their nervous system nuts. After several seconds, sometimes 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 seconds or a minute, a lot crawling up you, a lot of times they will fall off on their own and die, which is the cool thing about it. So at the end of the day, you're going to have a heck of a lot less ticks on you than had you had nothing on you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes it. Yeah, I use permethrin all the time. That's sprayed on my hunting clothes. I like it because it's odorless, right?
That's right.
And like my work pants and things like that I wear when I'm doing habitat work, I spray it on that. Just because I really don't want to get. I've gotten bit by a tick before. Luckily, as far as I know, I haven't contracted Lyme disease, but I have friends who have, and
Yeah.
I've seen how awful that is, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned arthritic issues and
Yeah.
things. I don't want to deal with that, right? Um,
Here's a cool thing about permethrin though, that is so awesome. DEET needs to be applied every day. Permethrin, what happens when you spray it on your clothes, it actually binds to the fabric and stays there through multiple washings, and it's still effective. It's the really cool thing about it. Most permethrin that you're probably using is good for 6 weeks and 6 washes. It probably says right on the bottle right there. All right, which is great. I work with, I kind of work as a consultant, a conference speaker, an author, and I help safety directors at a lot of power companies and I educate them on how all this stuff works, like we're talking about right now, and how the products work. And but anyways, the permethrin, you can get it in several different ways. You can get little aerosol cans that may last for a couple weeks on you, or the water-based that you probably have there, good for 6 weeks, 6 washes. I use a product, also a permethrin, that is really cool because I mix it and I decide how long it's going to last. Because it's a concentrate, if I pour more in a bottle, it'll last longer. It'll last I can pour a little bit and last for 3 weeks, a little more last for 6 weeks, a little more last for 9 weeks, 12 weeks, up to 24 weeks. So because it's a concentrate, then it not only is so effective, but it saves me money because I'm mixing my own water. I'm not buying water. So that's a duration 10% that I work with right on my website, which is wonderful product. It's really cool, especially for the person like yourself. You can just do it right at home. It all comes in a box with everything there, so it's really cool. I like that a lot.
I like that idea of because like there's certain clothes I wear hunting specifically, right, that
For sure.
I only need it for maybe 3 weeks to really,
Yeah.
I only really need it to work for like maybe 3 weeks. But then I have other clothing that I wear, pretty much the entire season, or
Right.
like turkey season's coming up. That's a month, right? Like I want it to last 4
Yeah.
weeks, or archery season for us is 6 weeks. I want it to last that. Pheasant season for me typically is going to last between 8 and 10 weeks. So that's a longer time, right? So then I wouldn't have to reapply it. Mid
Right.
season, and I'm not saying that I don't want to reapply it mid season, but oftentimes I forget, right? Like that's not necessarily on the top of my mind when I'm trying to get it out the door with the dog and make sure I have everything I need.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could just do this, however you want. It's totally up to you. You design it to help you, and you get the concentrate, and then like I say, you mix it in the bottle right there yourself. Comes with the bottle. It's great. So it's then for sure you're set, because you
So
don't want ticks.
let's just go with hypothetical here. Let's say that someone's listening to this right now. They're getting out of their vehicle. They don't have any permethrin. But they're going to go. They want to try to keep ticks from getting on their body. Um, what could they do to try to keep that from happening without the presence of a repellent like permethrin?
Wow. Uh, that's tough. The only thing they could do is try to stay on well-worn paths. If they're not going through the brush, if they're going through the brush, they're gonna get something. If they don't have any repellent on them, even with repellent, the ticks are still gonna get on you, but then it's gonna eventually repel them. So yeah, if they got nothing like that on, they're out of luck. They're gonna get ticks. There's no
Okay.
question about it.
So I guess I'm trying to direct my question, phrase it the right way to direct it the way I'm thinking here. Like a tick on my clothes is not going to be harmful to me, right? If it's just crawling around my clothes,
Exactly
while it's
right.
right. It's once it reaches my skin that now it becomes an issue. So how can I keep ticks from getting onto my skin? I guess if I
Okay.
don't have that repellent option.
I get you then, yeah. What they can do is they can tuck their pants into their socks. It looks a little goofy and corny, but that's going to force the ticks to definitely stay on the outside. They can tuck in their shirts and as much as they possibly can, to keep the ticks on the outside. And then that's about all they can do for that. Then once they get home, here's kind of an interesting little tidbit here. They take those clothes because they may find a tick on them. If they don't find it, they're probably going to be one there anyways. They put their clothes and they throw them in the dryer on high for about 15 minutes. Not the washer, the dryer first on high for about 15 minutes. That dry heat will kill the ticks. Then you can put them in the washer, because you want to keep those clothes separate, because if you know for sure you've been in tick habitat and you're going to have ticks on you, throw everything in a dryer. That's a simple little tidbit that a lot of people love. Oh man, I never heard that before. Yeah,
that's good, because like I think, like when I come home, it's like, okay, take my clothes off, get them in the wash, just in case there's a tick on there.
Dryer first.
Dryer first. That's interesting. That's a good tidbit. I've heard the the tucking the, pant legs into your socks, into your boots, wearing long sleeves,
Yeah.
tucking your shirt in. What about wearing, like, I have made it a habit that even when it's warm out and I'm going hunting, I still wear some sort of um under layer, right? That's sort of form fitting. Sometimes it's like Under Armour compression, sometimes it's merino wool, something that's like tighter fitting that has like an elastic cuff on it. Would that help keep them off my skin, or is that all in my head?
That would help. There's actually a company that's called Rhino Skin that actually makes stuff just like what you're talking about there. Only I believe it's treated with permethrin, and maybe not even treated with permethrin. I think it just stops any tick from getting under the garment. So it's called, I think it's called Rhino Skin.
Okay.
It's been a while since I looked at that, but I've heard of that because it's kind of like on of what you're talking about. Your same wavelength of thought there.
Okay. All right. I mean, that in my head, that seemed to make sense. Like one extra layer may, it's a little tighter fitting, might help, last resort type thing. If somehow they get through the repellent or I forget to reapply, something like that was my thought process. But let's continue the talk about you get home, right? So you're in tick habitat. You probably more than likely have ticks on you, with the way things are here in the lower 48 these days. You take your clothes off and throw it in the dryer 15 minutes. That's a great tip that I definitely was not aware of. Then we're always told you want to check yourself for ticks.
Absolutely.
You want to check your whole body, but is there like specific areas that you should really be looking for that ticks tend to like, or do they just stop once they hit skin?
Well, yeah, they do have spots that they do like, like behind the knees, around the waistline, the groin area, the hairline area, sometimes armpits. They like those warmer places on bodies. But I also tell people, tick checks are very important when you've been out there. I tell people check every place where there is skin. And then I say, yep, even there too. Ladies and men, yep, they've been known to be there too. Whatever you're thinking, yes. Do it very, very thoroughly. Be in front of a mirror, bend over, get the ground, and check every place. Then if you do find one, that brings us into this here.
Yeah.
If you do find one attached, the sooner you get a tick off, the better off you're going to be. The longer they are on you, the more apt they are to, what I will say is, puke the bad stuff in you. Okay. And the way you even take a tick off is very important too. Now, I'm going to show you this here because I got a little tick. It's a little tiny baby one. I got a bigger one, but they're already wrapped up. The way you take a tick off is important. You don't want to grab it by the body because that tends to, you may squeeze the bad stuff into you when you're taking it off. So you want to grab it by the very base. You can use a little device, let's say a fine tip tweezers, or maybe a little thing called a tick key. Try not to grab the body, but grab it at the very base and pull it just straight up. If a little bit is left in your skin, you can dig it out a little bit and wash it with soap and water or alcohol or whatever. But then monitor that bite. Okay, you may want to save that tick too. It's not a bad idea to save the tick, or some people, I don't care if they shoot it with a 30-06, But when you don't want to tick off a tick, you want to be nice to it when you're taking it off. Okay. After that, you can be mean to it, but be nice to it when you take it off. Don't spin it around. Don't play with it. But just take it off as nicely as you can. Then monitor that bite. You make sure that bite, if it gets bad, let's say if it has a ring around it, they call it is a bullseye rash. That is a for sure sign that you're going to have problems. Okay, that's a telltale sign that's going to be Lyme disease. They don't all give that. Those diseases manifest their ways in different forms. My little niece got a whole bunch of little bullseyes all over her body. She's real little, I think 4 or something like that. Other people get the bullseye rash only comes in maybe half of the people. Other half don't get it. But I tell people, if that bite, hopefully you even know you got bit, because some people get bit, they don't even know it. But if they do know it, watch that bite. If it reacts bad somehow in the next couple of days, or if you start getting achy joints, flu-like symptoms, feeling crappy, maybe neurological, your vision. A lot of different little things can happen in those next couple days. See a doctor. And especially where you live in Pennsylvania, most doctors there and where I live here are going to be pretty aware of that. And most doctors are going to put somebody on an antibiotic. At that point, it's usually doxycycline. Now, I'm not a doctor, and I don't play one on TV, so I'm just saying that's a typical protocol, and that works wonders. That almost always takes care of it. Okay, but really, really watch that and get some kind of help. If you have those symptoms, like I mentioned, the bullseye rash, it's really, really bad around the, it's all red around there, arm swells up and stuff like that, and they don't give you anything, see another doctor. You can't mess with this. It's so important about early detection and early treatment is the absolute total key here. The people that have problems are the ones that maybe get bit and they say, oh, I'm not going to worry about that. And then just start feeling worse and worse and worse. And then months and months go on. They go to 14 different doctors and finally find one that says, oh, I think you got Lyme disease there 3 years ago. Now it's too late they can get help, but in the beginning is the most important time. Is that making sense here?
Yeah, because it's a bacterial infection, essentially, is what it is, right? So allowing that bacteria to fester is just going to make it, obviously even worse. I want to go back to removing the tick, though, because I've heard all kinds of ways to get off ticks, right? Everything from the tweezers, you can buy special tick pullers. I think you mentioned a tick key. I've heard people say that if you just like put your finger on its bum and like spin it in a circle, you make it dizzy and it'll back out. I've heard people say that they took a cigarette and put it real close to it, the burning end of a cigarette real close to it, and it'll back out. I've heard all kinds of stuff. Does any of that kind of stuff work, or is it just you gotta pull it out?
Normally not. Normally what's going to happen is you're just going to tick off the tick. I've heard of Vaseline too, fingernail polish, everything else like that too. The best thing I keep reading over and over and over and over again is a fine tip tweezers, grabbing at the very, very base so you're not squeezing the body. Just keep those things in mind. Being gentle with it, taking it off. If you spin it around, you're gonna, it may tend to have it puke in you, the bad stuff. So I come right back to those things again. Something like a tick key or a tweezers are the best things at the very base, right at the skin.
Okay. And you mentioned, the longer that it's attached to you, the more bad stuff is going to get into you, right? More of that bacteria is going to get into you, passing on more potential disease. Is there like, again, because I've heard all these like magic numbers of 2 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, like you can't, like I've heard times where they say like, as long as you get the tick off of you within 24 hours, you won't get Lyme disease. Is there some magic number, or it's just very simply like the sooner the better because it's just more bacteria going to go in?
I've heard all those numbers too. The most popular number I've heard is probably 24 hours, but I say, do tick checks daily. There are some ticks, I think it's it may be a soft tick that's out in the southwestern part of the United States. That works totally different than ours here in our eastern part of the United States. And they can transmit somebody quickly. All right. Way quicker than 24 hours. I mean, like let's say a half hour sometimes or less. But yeah, 24 hours is the typical time that I've heard. And but like I say, I as you heard me say, I didn't even give you time in the beginning. You're asking me about it now, but yeah, I've heard them all. And I just say, do tick checks daily. The sooner you get them off, the better. Sometimes, if like say my wife has long dark hair and it's hard for her to look, sometimes if we've been in the woods, I will look there. And then some of those hard spots, like little kids, parents are going to need to look at them too, because little kids are very apt to get stuff like this because they may not notice it as much because they're not going to groom themselves as much as what adults would. But yeah, the sooner the better is just the best case scenario is sooner the better.
Yeah, well, I mean, best case scenario is you don't get a tick on you, right? But
Absolutely, yeah,
the
for sure.
second best is get it off of you as soon as you can. And I would even say, I mean, daily, yes, that's great. If you have the ability, if you think like, oh, I feel something, which most times, whenever I've had a tick on my skin, or when I've been bitten, I haven't felt anything. But sometimes you do, you feel something. You're like, that didn't feel right. If you can, check yourself then, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
if you
sure.
can find it in your pants before you even get home, that's
Yeah.
that's better than waiting 12 hours when you get home,
Oh,
and
for
then
sure,
having
yeah.
to pull it out.
Yep. Because see, God also gave the ticks a little special saliva that they base is kind of gross, but they spit on our skin so it numbs the skin so that we can't even feel it when they bite into us. So I mean, they are very, I call them stealthy, like a stealth bomber. They're very secretive. They don't fly around. We can't see them do that kind of stuff, like a mosquito. But yeah, that's the sooner the better. And they're nasty little blood-sucking varmints is what I call them.
So, Brian, this has been great. This has been awesome stuff, and I know you want to end this episode on a little special note. So, I'm going to give you some time now to regale the audience with your special ending.
I'm a little crazy, of course, so I made up a poem about ticks a couple years ago, and it goes like this. I hate them little suckers. I want to terminate them all. So I do it with permethrin and love to watch them fall. From head to toe, I spray the stuff. My shoe, socks, clothes, and hats, because it works on more than ticks, like skeeters, chiggers, and even gnats. So I ask you, if you're listening, to keep away from Lyme, get started with permethrin, and now is the perfect time. Thank you.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. All right, Brian, thanks for coming on, and have a good rest of your day, man.
And hey, my website is for them to see this kind of stuff has a lot of information on it that we just went over, so they can, if they didn't remember it, they can get on there. It's the Tick Terminator.com, the Tick Terminator.com, and they can Google me, Brian Anderson, the Tick Terminator, see all kinds of stuff that I've done. But yeah, they can get some permethrin right there too, so it's awesome. So appreciate it.
That'll do it for this episode. I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank Brian for coming on and telling us all he knows about ticks. He's got a great personality, and he's a great speaker, and he's full of a lot of good, useful information. This time of year, the weather's getting nice. People are starting to spend more time outdoors, and as we're spending more time outdoors and quite frankly, just preferred tick habitat, you really got to make sure you're being careful with how you're dressing and how you're preparing yourself to try to keep ticks off of you. And then, of course, make sure that once you're done being outside, check yourself and your kids and your pets for ticks. As you're listening to this, I'm either going to be on my way to camp or at camp, the weekend after this episode comes out. And, that's as soon as we get back inside camp after, I'm going to do some shed hunting and just some general sort of looking around the property and doing a little bit of light prep of some food plots. I'm going to have the dog with me. I'm going to be checking myself for ticks when we get back. I'm going to be checking the dog for ticks. Of course, I will have already have done some preventative measures, right? I'm going to wear long pants. I'm going to wear, some long sleeves. I'm going to spray myself down with permethrin. I already have the tick and flea stuff, put on the dog for this season, but it's really important that, not only do we try to prevent, but we also check ourselves as well, because we don't want to end up with any of those tick-borne diseases coming into, especially Lyme disease. And here in PA, we know all too well just how prevalent Lyme disease is, and how much of a toll it can take on the body if you don't, recognize the symptoms early enough. Not to end on this bad note, but seriously, just be prepared when you go out, and that way you can put your mind at ease and really enjoy the outdoors. And as I always end every episode, I'm going to end it again the exact same way, and we're going to keep doing this. This nice weather really just puts it into in the forefront of your mind of get outside, take someone with you, and as always, stay wild. Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And here's how it works. It lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. You can even take conversations with your fans to the next level with Q&A and polls.